Sir, I need you to step back.
I didn't do anything wrong.
I will call security.
This is completely ridiculous.
Sir, you need to sit down. Sit down right now.
I was just getting my bag.
You need to step away from me right now.
I did not do anything wrong.
I am the boss of this cabin. I'm sick of your attitude. Get off my plane. I didn't do anything. Why are you yelling at me?
Ma'am, please calm down.
You people always find a way to make a scene. The words landed before Marcus Coleman had said a single thing. They landed the way a slap lands, fast, deliberate, already finished before he could raise a hand to stop it. He hadn't touched his tray. He hadn't raised his voice. He had simply looked down at the plate in front of him and gone still. The croissant sandwich on seat 3A's tray table was the color of wet cardboard, split at one edge to reveal a smear of green-gray fuzz creeping along the underside of the bread. Beside it sat a paper cup of coffee that had gone cold enough to grow a thin skin on top. Around him, the first-class cabin of Meridian Skyways Flight 512 hummed, with the low, expensive comfort of people who had never once had to wonder if the food in front of them was safe to eat. Warm plates of Eggs Benedict, fresh squeezed orange juice in real glass. A businessman too rose up laughing quietly into his phone about a golf handicap. Marcus Coleman was 54 years old, with deep brown skin weathered by 5 decades of Georgia's sun, and close-cropped gray hair he kept short out of habit, not vanity. He wore a plain charcoal sweater, no tie, no watch worth mentioning, and a scuffed brown leather satchel tucked under the seat in front of him. Pinned to his sweater collar, small enough that most people never noticed it, was a tiny silver dove, his mother's, given to him the year she retired, from 31 years of cleaning hotel rooms in downtown Atlanta, so that other people's children could sleep in clean sheets. He lifted his eyes to the flight attendant standing over him. Her name tag read Deborah Whitfield. She was 46, with pale, powdery skin, a tight platinum blonde bun pinned, so severely it looked painful, and the kind of professional smile that had been trained rather than felt. 22 years of seniority sat on her shoulders like a uniform of its own. She did not blink under his gaze. She had already decided who he was before he opened his mouth, and nothing he said now was going to change her mind, only confirm it. "I ordered the grilled salmon," Marcus said quietly, "and a basil Hayden neat. It's in the confirmation." "We ran out," Deborah said, already turning away. "This is what's available for your section. For your section, not for this row. Not for economy passengers who upgraded. For your section," as if the ticket in his hand, the one that had cost $4,190, had somehow been sold to him under different terms than everyone else breathing the same recycled air. Marcus did not raise his voice. He had learned, over 54 years, that anger was a gift you handed to the person trying to provoke you, and he had stopped giving gifts to people like Deborah Whitfield a long time ago. He breathed in slowly, through his nose, set both hands flat on the armrests, and said nothing at all. That silence would turn out to be the loudest thing on the entire aircraft. Across the aisle, in seat 3C, a silver-haired man named Walter Ingram lowered his newspaper half an inch. He was 71, pale-skinned, a retired federal judge from Colorado with the kind of face that had spent 4 decades learning to read a room before anyone spoke. He looked at Marcus's tray. He looked at his own, a warm plate of smoked salmon, and capers, poured coffee, a cloth napkin. He said nothing yet, but his brow folded, and his eyes did not move away. Marcus's phone buzzed once against his knee. He glanced down. A message from his executive assistant, Simone Carter. "Wheels up in 19 minutes. Board packet updated. Safe travels." He typed back, with 2 fingers, unhurried, documenting a service issue on 512. "Stay near your phone." He set the phone face down on the tray, beside the moldy bread, and looked out the window at the tarmac of Hartsfield-Jackson International, where a ground crew truck rolled past under a flat, gray Atlanta sky. What Deborah Whitfield did not know, what nobody on that aircraft knew, was that the man in seat 3A was not simply a passenger with an expensive ticket. 4 years earlier, when Meridian Skyways had been 11 weeks from bankruptcy, staring down $340 million in debt, and a fleet of aircraft older than half its pilots, Marcus Coleman had walked into a boardroom in Charlotte, North Carolina, and personally wired the capital that kept it flying. He held a seat on the board. He had pushed over the objections of two senior vice presidents for the very passenger dignity standards training program that Deborah Whitfield had. According to records, Simone was already pulling up 900 miles away, failed to complete twice. He had not boarded Flight 512 to announce any of that. He had boarded it the way he boarded every quarterly audit flight, quietly, in coach clothes, under his own name, because a man could learn more about what his company actually was in 40 minutes in Seat 3A than in 40 hours of PowerPoint slides in a glass tower. He had not expected to learn it this fast. He studied the sandwich the way a man studies a wound, before deciding whether to touch it. The green stain was small. It could be explained away, if a person wanted to explain it away: inventory shortage, a rushed catering run, an honest mistake. One bad tray meant nothing on its own. But Marcus Coleman had spent 30 years building companies, and he knew that a single data point was noise. A pattern was a signal, and something in Deborah Whitfield's flat, unbothered eyes told him this was not the first tray she had ever handed a man like him. He reached up and pressed the call button. A soft chime sounded above his seat. Deborah glanced up the aisle, met his eyes for exactly 1 second, and kept walking toward the galley. He waited. The cabin filled, with the comfortable sounds of privilege being served properly, ice into crystal, warm plates onto linen. A woman 2 rows back, thanking a different attendant for remembering her gluten allergy, without being asked twice. He pressed the button again. This time Deborah turned back, with visible irritation stamped across her face, as though he had interrupted something far more important than her actual job. She walked the aisle slowly, deliberately, the way a person walks when they want you to understand that your request is an imposition. Yes. Her voice was pitched low enough to sound professional and sharp enough to draw blood. Marcus lifted the edge of the bread with his fork. "There's mold on this," he said evenly, "and I pre-ordered a different meal entirely. I have the confirmation number, if you'd like it." Deborah barely glanced down. "I don't see any mold." The sentence hung in the recycled air of the cabin, and everyone within 4 rows understood exactly what it meant. She was not disputing a fact. She was asking him to distrust his own eyes, a request that men, who looked like Marcus Coleman, had been receiving in hotel lobbies and bank branches and courtrooms for longer than Deborah Whitfield had been alive. He turned the tray a few inches, so the green mark faced the aisle, where the morning light from the window caught it clean and undeniable. "It's right here," he said, visible to anyone who wants to look. Something flickered across Walter Ingram's face in Seat 3C. Not shock exactly, but recognition, the specific recognition of a man who has spent a long career learning to identify cruelty the moment it tries to dress itself up as procedure. Pay attention to that flicker. It will matter again before this flight lands, twice. Deborah's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "If you're unhappy with what's available, sir, I can bring you something from the back." "The back," Marcus repeated, quiet as still water. Across the aisle, Walter Ingram set his coffee down without a sound. Marcus kept his voice level. "I'm not asking for anything special. I'm asking for the same meal, the same drink, and the same basic courtesy every other person in this cabin received, without having to ask twice." Deborah leaned in slightly, close enough that only the nearest rows caught the words. "Not everyone can always get exactly what they want," she said. "Sometimes people need to just be grateful for what's offered." Grateful. Marcus had heard that word, or some careful, cologne-scented cousin of it, in hotel lobbies in Buckhead, in loan offices in downtown Charlotte, in country clubs he had been personally invited to join, and then quietly discouraged from actually using. Be grateful. Don't make it a whole thing. Don't ask for the same thing too loudly, or someone will decide you're the problem instead of the solution. He looked up at her, and for the first time his voice carried something harder underneath the calm. "I'm not asking for special treatment," he said. "I'm asking for equal treatment. There's a difference, and I think you already know it." For half a second, the professional mask, over Deborah's face slipped completely, and what sat underneath it was not embarrassment. It was annoyance, the specific, curdled annoyance of a woman who had just been made to hear, out loud, a thing she had spent 22 years training herself never to say plainly. A younger flight attendant appeared behind her shoulder, sandy-haired, 29 years old, his name tag reading Trevor Lang. "Everything all right over here?" he asked, though his eyes had already picked a side before he finished the sentence. Deborah crossed her arms. "This passenger is refusing his meal and becoming difficult. I haven't raised my voice once," Marcus said. "I pointed out spoiled food and asked for the meal I paid for. That's the entirety of what's happened here." Trevor's eyes flicked to the sandwich, too fast, too dismissive to have actually looked. "Sir, meal availability can shift during boarding. We're still at the gate," Marcus said. "The aircraft hasn't moved." Trevor blinked and said nothing. Across the aisle, Renee Castillo, 31, warm brown skin, a navy blazer folded over her lap. On her way to a job interview in Denver, she had been rehearsing for on the flight to LaGuardia, and back for a week, had stopped pretending to read her book entirely. Her thumb moved, quiet, almost accidental, and the record light on her phone camera blinked awake in her lap. Marcus's phone buzzed again on the tray table. He did not reach for it yet. Deborah's eyes dropped to the screen, then flicked back up to his face, a small, involuntary tell, the kind people give away when they realize, somewhere underneath the certainty, that they might have misjudged the size of the fire they were standing next to. He picked it up. A message from Simone. Initial poll shows 3 prior complaints referencing D. Whitfield by name over the past 2 years. Pattern language, downgraded service, different treatment, denied pre-order. Pulling full file now. He read it once, placed the phone face down again, and looked from the sandwich, to Deborah, to Trevor. "Please bring the purser," he said. Deborah gave a short laugh, through her nose, as if the request itself were an act of aggression. But behind the galley curtain, a shape shifted, someone listening who had not yet decided whether to step forward. The aircraft had not left the gate, and already, the truth was boarding. The purser arrived wearing the specific, practiced calm of a woman who had spent a career learning to make problems disappear without ever actually touching them. Her name was Carla Jimenez, 44, light brown skin, dark hair pinned tight, a tablet clutched against her chest like a small shield. "Mr. Coleman," she said, glancing at the manifest on her screen before meeting his eyes. "I understand there's some concern about your meal." Concern, not complaint, not spoiled food. Concern, the softest, safest word available, chosen the way a lawyer chooses a word. Marcus gestured to the tray. "This was served in first class. The bread is spoiled. I did not receive the meal I pre-ordered, and I have not been offered the beverage that was confirmed with my ticket." For one unguarded moment, Carla's eyes dropped to the tray and actually looked, really looked, at the green stain, the curling bread, the skin forming on the cold coffee. Something crossed her face. Then it smoothed over, the way trained faces do. "I'm so sorry about the presentation," she said. "Let me offer you something fresh from our business class selection once we're airborne." "Why business class?" Marcus asked. "This is a first-class ticket. Everyone around me received first-class service. Why am I the one being offered a downgrade after being served food that shouldn't be served to anyone?" Heads turned. Renee lowered her phone slightly, but kept it recording, angled toward the aisle. Walter Ingram set his coffee cup down on its saucer, with a small, deliberate click that seemed to carry more weight than the sound should have allowed. "Sir," Carla said, her voice dropping, "I need to ask you to be mindful of the cabin environment." The cabin environment was calm, Marcus said, until I asked why I was being treated differently than everyone sitting around me. Deborah broke in from behind Carla's shoulder. "Some passengers simply have more detailed loyalty profiles with us. We prioritize based on tier." Marcus let a long second pass before he answered. "I'm a Meridian Founders Circle member," he said quietly. "Top tier. Have been since the program launched." Carla's thumb moved across the tablet almost on reflex. Her eyes tracked down the screen and stopped. There it was, lit up in front of her. Coleman, M. Founders Circle, Seat 3A, Confirmed salmon entree. Confirmed Basil Hayden. No fare adjustment. No voucher. No error on the passenger's side of the ledger. Carla's throat moved. She said nothing. Deborah saw the tablet too. Saw the record contradict every excuse she had just handed to a cabin full of witnesses, and for one unguarded flicker, uncertainty crossed her face. Then pride swallowed it whole. Well, she said, almost under her breath, but not quite quiet enough. Status doesn't always teach people how to behave. The words hit the cabin like a dropped glass. Walter Ingram set his napkin down with a slow, deliberate care that made every head near him turn. "Excuse me," he said. His voice was not loud. It did not need to be. It carried the specific weight of a man who had spent 31 years on a federal bench and who had long ago learned that the quietest sentence in a room was usually the most dangerous one. "I have watched this entire exchange since boarding. This man has not raised his voice once. He has asked reasonable, specific questions. And from where I sit, he has been treated in a manner no one else in this cabin has been treated." Carla's face tightened. "Sir, I appreciate your concern, but crew matters are handled by crew." "Then handle it properly," Walter said, and did not look away. The cabin went still in a way that had weight to it. No clink of silverware, no rustle of paper, just the low mechanical hum of the aircraft idling at the gate, and 31 strangers suddenly, silently, paying attention to the same thing. That stillness is worth remembering. It will happen once more before this story is finished, and the second time, it will not be quiet at all. Deborah leaned toward Carla and murmured, low enough that she clearly believed no one else could hear, "He's making everyone uncomfortable." But the overhead galley microphone caught it. So did Renee's phone. So, 3 rows back, did the small black surveillance dot mounted above the exit row, a camera installed 18 months earlier, as part of the very cabin monitoring initiative Marcus himself had championed in a Charlotte boardroom, not as punishment, but as accountability, a way to know what actually happened in the cabin when no manager was standing in the aisle. Deborah Whitfield did not know that camera existed. She was about to learn. Carla forced one last professional smile. "Mr. Coleman, we'll review this properly after departure. For now, please accept the business class option." Marcus looked at the tray, then at the row of watching faces, then back at Carla. "No," he said. "One word. Clear. Final. I want this documented before we leave the gate." Deborah laughed softly through her nose. Trevor's jaw tightened. Carla's professional warmth went cold at the edges. And somewhere beyond the closed cockpit door, Captain Gregory Sanders was about to be handed a version of this story that was not true, and he was going to believe every word of it, because it was easier than believing his own crew had gotten something badly wrong. Captain Sanders came down the aisle the way a man walks, into a problem he has already decided how to solve. 59 years old, pale, weathered skin, silver hair cropped military short, 31 years of seniority carried like armor across his shoulders. Passengers straightened in their seats as he passed. Crew stepped aside without being asked. "Mr. Coleman," he said, stopping beside seat 3A. "My crew tells me you're refusing service and creating a disturbance before departure." Marcus looked up slowly. "That's not accurate, Captain." Deborah exhaled behind him, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh, but loud enough for Sanders to hear it and read it as confirmation. "I understand you're unhappy with your meal," Sanders said, "but we have a full aircraft, a departure window, and federal regulations requiring passenger compliance with crew instructions." "I understand the regulations," Marcus said. "I also understand that asking why I was served spoiled food is not a safety violation." A murmur moved through the row behind him. Sanders' eyes flicked to the tray for the first time, landed on the green-streaked bread, then moved away almost as fast, as if looking too closely might complicate the story he had already decided to believe. "Food concerns can be handled through customer care after landing," he said. Walter Ingram leaned forward. "Captain, with respect, the man is not exaggerating anything." Sanders turned to him, his tone softening a full shade. "Sir, I appreciate the input, but I need passengers to remain seated and let my crew do their jobs." That small shift, the courtesy handed to Walter, the flat command handed to Marcus, did not go unnoticed by a single person in the row. Marcus felt the old, familiar ache rise in his chest. Not surprise, never surprise anymore. Only the particular exhaustion of having to prove the obvious, while staying calm enough to be believed. "Captain Sanders," Marcus said, "before you make a decision, I'd like you to actually review what happened. I was denied my pre-ordered meal and beverage, served spoiled bread, and when I questioned it calmly, I was described as disruptive." "That's not true," Deborah cut in. "He's been challenging us since the moment he sat down." "You kept hitting the call button," Trevor added. "Because no one answered it," Marcus said. Sanders lifted one hand. "Enough." The cabin went quiet at the word, quiet enough that the engine hum outside seemed to grow louder, quiet enough that a baby crying somewhere behind the curtain in economy suddenly sounded very far away. Sanders leaned down toward Marcus, his voice dropping into the register men use when they believe they are being reasonable. "I'm going to give you one clear instruction. Accept the accommodation offered by the purser. Stop questioning my crew. Let this flight depart on schedule." Marcus held his gaze without blinking. "And if I don't stop asking why I'm being treated differently than everyone around me, then I'll have to consider whether your behavior presents a risk to the safe operation of this flight." There it was, the threat, dressed neatly in the language of policy. Renee's phone camera clicked softly in her lap, still recording. Her hand trembled slightly, but she did not lower it. "Captain," Deborah said, quiet and urgent, "this is exactly what I've been telling you. He's turning the whole cabin against the crew." "No," Marcus said, without raising his voice at all. "Your actions are doing that." "I've done nothing but ask a question you don't want to answer." Sanders straightened, color rising under his weathered skin. "Mr. Coleman, this is your final warning." Marcus's phone buzzed once more. He glanced down. "Simone, legal notified. HR Director Denise Okafor reviewing complaint file now. Confirms pattern, 3 prior incidents, all involving Whitfield, all closed without action. Surveillance feed for Cabin 1 is live and archived." He set the phone face down again. "Captain," he said quietly, "I'm asking you to pause for one moment, before you do something you can't undo." "This aircraft is not a courtroom," Sanders said. "No," Marcus said, "but it's still a place where people are responsible for what they do in it." For one long second, something uncertain crossed Sanders' face, the flicker of a man who could feel, faintly, the story slipping out from under the shape his crew had given it. Then pride made the decision for him, the way pride so often does for men who have never once had to doubt whether the story would be believed. He keyed the radio clip to his shoulder. "Gate Ops, this is Sanders on Meridian 512. We may need security at the door." A sharp breath moved through the cabin, collective, immediate. Marcus looked out the window, then back at the captain, his voice never rising above a level, steady calm. "Once you call security on a passenger for asking about discrimination, Captain, you don't get to pretend this was ever only about a sandwich." Sanders' eyes narrowed. He turned and walked back toward the cockpit, without another word, and behind the galley curtain, the small black camera kept recording everything, Deborah's crossed arms relaxing, with quiet satisfaction, Trevor's eager glance toward the front door, as if backup were arriving, Carla staring hard at her tablet, thumb frozen, no longer pretending to review notes. She knew, in that instant, that a line had been crossed that could not be walked back. Marcus knew it too. He had spent most of his adult life learning exactly where such lines were drawn, some in contracts, some in law, and some in the small, silent pause before another human being decided whether to see his humanity or only the color of his skin. 2 gate security officers boarded 4 minutes later, with a supervisor trailing behind them, and what happened next would not stay contained to seat 3A. It was about to become the story of the entire aircraft. The first officer, a broad-shouldered man in his 30s, stopped in the aisle beside seat 3A and looked down at Marcus, with the practiced neutrality of someone who had been told very little and asked to assume the worst. "Sir, we've received a report of a disruptive passenger. I'll need you to gather your things and step off the aircraft." Marcus did not move. "On what grounds?" "The captain's authority is sufficient grounds," the officer said. Behind him, The supervisor, a woman in her 50s named Patricia Alvarez, dark hair streaked, with gray, an airport ID lanyard swinging against a navy blazer, glanced down at her own tablet to confirm the gate assignment and stopped cold. Her eyes lifted from the screen to Marcus's face, then back to the screen, then back to his face. "Mr. Coleman?" she said, her voice suddenly careful in an entirely different way. Marcus Coleman? The cabin, which had gone tense and murmuring, went utterly silent, the second frozen moment of the flight, and this one had teeth. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the hum of the auxiliary power unit seemed to fade beneath the sheer weight of the pause. Renee's phone was still recording, her thumb white against the case. Walter Ingram sat perfectly still, both hands folded, over the head of his cane he had not needed once, since boarding, but now gripped like an anchor. "Yes," Marcus said simply. Patricia's expression shifted, through 3 stages in under 2 seconds: recognition, alarm, and then something close to dread. "Sir, I wasn't told it was you. I saw the merger announcement Tuesday. You're on the board. You're one of the—" "I'm a passenger right now," Marcus said quietly. "That's all I asked to be treated as." Deborah's face had gone the color of old paper. That's not possible," she said, her voice climbing half an octave. "He's a passenger in seat 3A. He can't just suddenly be on the board." "That's convenient timing, isn't it? Now he's important?" Even standing in front of a security supervisor holding proof on a company tablet, Deborah Whitfield did not step back. She did not soften. If anything, her chin lifted higher, as though the ground shifting beneath her only meant she needed to plant her feet harder. That refusal, that flat, immovable refusal to consider, even for 1 second, that she might be wrong, is the exact thing that was about to end her career. Not the mold, not the cold coffee, the refusal. The first officer looked between Patricia, Deborah, and the man sitting calm, as still water in seat 3A, and slowly lowered the hand he had extended toward Marcus's armrest. "Ma'am," Patricia said to Deborah, her tone gone flat and formal, "I need you to step back from the passenger." "He's the one who—" "Step back," Patricia repeated, and this time it was not a request. Marcus's phone buzzed once more. "Simone, Diane Okafor is en route to gate A19 in person. She's bringing legal. Captain has been asked to hold the aircraft." He read the message and, for the first time since the sandwich had landed on his tray, allowed himself a slow exhale. But the flight was not over. Sanders, still convinced he was managing a security threat rather than presiding over the unraveling of his own crew's credibility, had already ordered pushback from the gate before the second security call reached him, and Flight 512 was now 30 feet from the jet bridge, engines spooling, when the tower relayed an emergency instruction to return to the gate. Passengers who had felt only a ripple of tension in first class now felt the entire aircraft shudder to a stop mid-taxi, the pilot's voice crackling overhead, with a clipped, unconvincing explanation about a minor operational matter. In economy, 140 passengers, who had heard almost nothing of what happened 4 rows ahead of the curtain, now sat gripping armrests, exchanging confused, worried glances, phones already lighting up with messages to spouses and employers about a delay nobody could explain. 41 minutes. That was how long it took to taxi back to the gate, reopen the door, and let Patricia Alvarez climb the jet bridge stairs, with a company vice president trailing behind her. 41 minutes in, which every so on, that aircraft became, without asking to be, a witness to something none of them would forget by the time they finally reached Denver. Denise Okafor walked down the aisle like a woman who had spent 19 years learning exactly how much weight a calm voice could carry. She was 51, deep brown skin like Marcus's own, hair pulled back in a simple silver-streaked twist, a slim folder tucked under one arm. She did not look at Deborah first. She looked at Marcus. "Mr. Coleman," she said, "I'm sorry it took this long to reach you." "It's all right, Denise," Marcus said. "I wanted to see it happen without help. Now I have." Denise turned, finally, to Deborah Whitfield, whose face had gone from pale to a blotchy, furious red. "Ms. Whitfield," she said, opening the folder just enough to show the top page, without handing it over. This is your third documented complaint of differential service in 26 months. All 3 previous complaints were closed by a supervisor, who is a personal friend of yours, without investigation and without notification to corporate compliance. I have all 3 files. I have this morning's cabin recording. And as of right now, you are relieved of duty pending termination review. You can't do this, Deborah said, her voice cracking not with grief but with disbelief that the ground beneath her had actually given way. 22 years. 22 years of service, and you're going to end it over a sandwich? No, Denise said, and her voice did not rise because it did not need to. I'm ending it over a pattern. The sandwich is just the piece you got caught on. Trevor Lang, standing near the galley, had gone pale and silent, his hands opening and closing at his sides. When Denise turned to him, he spoke before she could. I should have said something, he said quietly. I saw the tray before it went out. I didn't check it because she told me not to slow the cart down. I'm sorry. I mean it. Denise studied him for a long moment. You're suspended pending retraining, not termination, she said. That's the difference between a mistake and a pattern, Mr. Lang. Remember it. Carla Jimenez, standing near the curtain, with her tablet still clutched to her chest, said nothing at all, but her eyes were wet, and when Denise looked at her, she only nodded once, a small, private acknowledgement of a coward's minute finally being paid for. Captain Sanders appeared in the aisle a moment later, having emerged from the cockpit to find his authority quietly dismantled in front of 187 passengers. Ms. Okafor, he began, I made a judgment call based on the information available to me at the time. You made a judgment call based on which passenger's voice you decided to trust before you ever looked at the tray in front of you, Denise said. That's the whole review, Captain. We'll discuss the rest at the base. Sanders' jaw worked, but for the first time in 40 minutes, he had nothing left to say. Marcus rose, at last, from seat 3A. Diane, Denise, offered him the handset for the cabin PA, and for a moment he simply looked down the aisle, past first class, past the curtain, toward the 140 strangers in economy who had missed connections and rides and meetings because of what had happened 4 rows ahead of them, most of whom had heard only fragments, some of whom had filmed the worst of it on their phones, without ever knowing why. He took the handset. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, and his voice filled the cabin, low and steady, the same voice that had stayed calm through every insult of the last 41 minutes. My name is Marcus Coleman. I want to explain why this flight was delayed, because you deserve better than a vague apology over a loudspeaker. The cabin went still, not the brittle stillness of before, but something quieter, more attentive. I boarded today as a passenger. I had a confirmed first-class ticket and a confirmed meal order. I expected exactly what every person on this aircraft should expect: safe travel, fair service, and basic respect. Instead, I was served food that had gone bad, denied the meal and drink I'd paid for, and when I asked calm, specific questions about why, I was called disruptive. Some of you saw that happen. A few of you spoke up when it would have been far easier to look away. I want to thank you specifically for that. Walter Ingram lowered his head slightly. Renee wiped one cheek with the back of her hand, her phone finally lowered into her lap. I also happen to be one of Meridian Skyways' founding investors, Marcus continued. I helped fund the fleet upgrades and the training programs that were supposed to prevent exactly what happened in this cabin today. But policies on paper mean nothing if the people responsible for them don't believe they apply to everyone equally. A company becomes what it tolerates. Today, for at least 22 years, this company tolerated something it should never have allowed to happen even once. No one moved. Even the flight attendants standing near the galley stood frozen. The employees involved have been removed from this flight pending a full investigation. But I want to be clear about something, because it matters more than any of the individual names involved. Accountability should never depend on a passenger happening to have power. It shouldn't depend on a business card, or a title, or a camera catching the right angle at the right moment. Every person on this aircraft deserved better from the very first minute of boarding, not because of who any of us are, but because of what basic decency actually requires. A low murmur rolled through the cabin, not anger now, but something closer to recognition. "I'm sorry for the delay this caused everyone here today," Marcus said, his voice slowing. "Your time matters. Your plans mattered before this happened, and they still matter now. Discrimination aimed at one passenger doesn't stay contained to one seat. It creates fear in every row behind it. It creates silence in people who might have spoken up but decided it wasn't worth the risk. It travels further than any of us like to admit." Denise Okafor stepped forward and added, her own voice carrying now through the cabin, "Meridian Skyways will be refunding every ticket on this flight in full. Every passenger will also receive a travel credit equal to a future round-trip flight. Our customer relations team will personally assist anyone whose connections have been disrupted today." A gasp moved through economy. Someone near the back said, loud enough to carry, "Are you serious?" Marcus did not smile. "This isn't a reward," he said. "It's a responsibility we should have met the first time, without ever needing to be forced into it. And after we land, I'll be asking the board to open a full review of every discrimination complaint filed against this airline over the past 5 years, not to protect the company's reputation, but to protect the people who trusted us to be better than this." For a moment, no one moved at all. Then Walter Ingram rose slowly, one hand braced on the head of his cane, and began to clap, once, then again, unhurried. Renee joined him a second later. The applause spread backward, through first class, past the curtain, into economy, until the entire cabin filled with a sound that was not celebration so much as release, the specific sound of 187 strangers finally exhaling something they hadn't realized they'd been holding. Marcus sat back down beside the window, exhausted in a way no amount of sleep was going to fix. Outside, the runway stretched out under a flat, gray sky. Inside the aircraft, something had shifted. Not healed, not yet, but seen, and being seen, Marcus had learned a long time ago, was always where healing had to start. Flight 512 finally reached Denver 2 hours and 19 minutes behind schedule, and no one rushed off the aircraft the way passengers usually did. They filed out slowly, quietly, as if moving too fast would somehow disrespect what they had all just witnessed together. Marcus remained in his seat until the aisle cleared, his satchel folded over one arm, his phone already filling with messages from the board, from legal, from Simone, from people who suddenly understood that one spoiled sandwich had exposed something far larger than a single bad shift. At the aircraft door, the relief captain, who had taken over for the return leg, stopped him with a nod. "Mr. Coleman," she said, "I hope the rest of the flight gave you at least a little peace." Marcus looked back down the aisle, the same seats, the same recycled air, an entirely different feeling. "It gave me clarity," he said. Denise Okafor was waiting in the terminal, with 2 members of the executive compliance team. No press, no cameras, just tired faces and thick folders. "We pulled the full archive during the flight," she said. "The tray, the comments, Whitfield's file, all 3 prior complaints, all closed by the same supervisor, without so much as a phone call to the passengers who filed them." One of the compliance officers, a man named Frank Delaney, added quietly, "The 3 prior complainants were Dr. Amaran Wosu, a physician flying out of Charlotte 18 months ago. Retired NBA forward Cedric Wallace, flying out of Miami 11 months ago. And a software engineer named Lynn Tran, flying out of San Francisco this past spring. Same pattern in every file: meal substitution, dismissive comments, threats to involve security. All 3 complaints were closed within 72 hours with no investigation." Marcus absorbed the names in silence. Justice, he had learned a long time ago, was never joy. Sometimes it was only the moment the truth finally stopped being ignored. The following Tuesday, the Meridian Skyways boardroom on the 14th floor of the Charlotte headquarters was silent in a way boardrooms rarely are. The recording played once on the wall screen, Deborah's flat refusal, Trevor's dismissive glance, Sanders keying his radio, Marcus sitting still, with spoiled food in front of him. No one asked to see it a second time. Then the complaint files appeared, one after another. Not one, not two. 3 years of them, describing the same pattern in different voices: cold service, extra scrutiny, missing meals, dismissed concerns, small travel vouchers offered instead of any real accountability. Marcus stood at the head of the table. This company didn't fail because one employee made one cruel choice, he said. It failed because too many people, over too many years, learned that looking away was easier than confronting what they saw. That ends today. No one interrupted him. Not this time. By that afternoon, the board approved a full 5-year review of every discrimination complaint on file, mandatory retraining for every customer-facing employee across the airline, an independent passenger equity panel with authority to overrule regional management, and a new rule requiring any serious complaint to be reviewed by at least 2 separate departments before it could be closed. By evening, Meridian Skyways issued a public statement that did not hide behind vague corporate language. It named what had happened. It apologized to the passengers affected. It committed to reform with specific dates and named oversight, not empty promises. Deborah Whitfield's termination was finalized 6 weeks later, following a union grievance hearing that lasted 4 hours and ended with the arbitrator siding unanimously with the airline. She lost her pension vesting by 11 months, a detail her attorney mentioned to her flatly, without softening it, the way facts are delivered to people who have run out of people willing to soften things for them. She did not apologize during the hearing. She told the arbitration panel, jaw set, that she had always treated every passenger fairly, and that this was one man, with connections, making an example of her. She still, even then, could not see it. For 4 months, Deborah Whitfield worked the register at a home goods store in a strip mall outside Charlotte, a job she had taken because 22 years of airline seniority did not transfer to anywhere else, and because the story of Flight 512 had traveled far enough that 2 smaller regional carriers had quietly declined to interview her at all. She told herself, most days, that she had simply been unlucky, the wrong passenger, the wrong camera, the wrong week for the airline to care. It was a Tuesday afternoon in March, for months after the flight, when something in her finally cracked open. A young black man in his 20s came through her checkout line with a stack of moving boxes, exhausted, clearly juggling more than he could carry, a new apartment, a new job, not enough sleep. The coworker at the next register, a woman about Deborah's own age, made a comment under her breath as he walked away, something about acting like he owns the place, loud enough for Deborah to hear, quiet enough to deny later if challenged. Deborah opened her mouth to say nothing, the way she always had. And then, for the first time in 22 years and 4 months, she heard herself instead. He didn't do anything, she said. He was just buying boxes. Her coworker rolled her eyes and moved on. But Deborah stood there at her register for a long moment afterward, her hands flat on the counter, feeling something she had spent an entire career refusing to feel, the exact, specific shame of recognizing her own voice in someone else's mouth. That night, she wrote a letter. She did not send it for 3 weeks, and when she finally did, it went not to Marcus Coleman directly, but to Denise Okafor's office, care of Meridian Skyways corporate compliance, because some part of her still understood that Marcus Coleman owed her nothing, not even the courtesy of reading it. In it, she did not ask for her job back. She did not ask for her pension. She wrote, in handwriting that had gone shaky in a way it never had on 22 years of flight manifests, that she had spent a long time believing she was protecting standards, and that it had taken losing everything to understand she had only ever been protecting her own comfort at the expense of other people's dignity. She asked, at the very end, whether there was any way to help with the new training program, not to earn anything back, she wrote, but because it felt like the only useful thing left to do with what she now understood. Denise read the letter twice before deciding what to do with it. She did not offer Deborah a job, but she did forward it, along with her own note, to the small working group designing Meridian's new bias awareness curriculum, and 6 months after that, Deborah Whitfield sat in the back row of a training session she was not paid to attend, listening to a facilitator describe the exact pattern of small dismissals she had spent 22 years perfecting and did not once look away. 6 months after the flight, Marcus Coleman boarded Meridian Skyways Flight 512 again. Same route, same seat, morning light falling soft and gold through the window. The cabin smelled of fresh coffee and clean leather. A new senior flight attendant, a woman named Priya Anand, greeted every passenger by name. As they boarded, her voice warm and unhurried. When she reached seat 3A, she smiled. "Good morning, Mr. Coleman. Your salmon is confirmed, and your basil Hayden will be served after takeoff. Can I bring you water before we push back?" Marcus studied her face. No suspicion in it. No performance either, just service, offered the way it should have been offered the very first time. "Just water," he said. "Thank you." A few minutes later, a familiar figure appeared in the aisle, moving slowly with a cane he had clearly stopped needing to lean on quite so hard. Walter Ingram lowered himself into 3C with a small grunt and a wide grin. "Couldn't resist taking this route again," he said. "Wanted to see for myself whether the airline actually learned anything." Marcus almost laughed. "And has it?" Walter glanced around the freshly quiet, freshly ordinary cabin. "So far," he said, "I'd say somebody finally listened." As the aircraft lifted off above Atlanta, Marcus looked out at the clouds and thought, not for the first time, about the shape of real power. Not the loud kind. Not the kind that needs an audience to feel large. The kind that opens a door quietly and holds it open long enough for the next person to walk through it too. He touched the small silver dove pin to his collar, the one his mother had worn on her cleaning uniform for 31 years, without a single person ever asking her name. He had been underestimated for most of his life. Eventually, he had been heard. But the true victory, he understood now, was not that people had finally learned who he was. The true victory would be the day none of it, the title, the investment, the boardroom, the tablet record proving he belonged exactly where he was sitting, was ever required for a person to be treated with basic dignity in the first place. Respect should never depend on a business card. It should begin the moment a person walks through the door. If this story moved you, not because of how it ended, but because you recognized someone in it, maybe even yourself, sitting in one of those quiet, watching seats, take a moment to like it, so it reaches someone who needs to hear it today. Share it with anyone who still believes that staying silent keeps the peace. And leave a comment. Have you ever been in that cabin? And if you have, which seat were you sitting in? I read every single answer.